Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome to the Delighted Customers Podcast. I am so glad you're here. We challenge conventional thinking about customer experience because I believe that improving experiences isn't just good for business, it's a powerful way to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Each week, we feature thought-provoking conversations with industry thought leaders from a variety of backgrounds, offering unique perspectives and actionable insights. Get ready to sharpen your leadership and transform your approach to customer experience. Let's dive in. Well, this will be a special episode of the Delighted Customers Podcast. I'm so excited to have back on the show Lou Carbone, who is the founder, president, and chief experience officer of Experience Engineering, a Minneapolis-based consulting firm dedicated to customer and employee experience management. He is widely regarded as the father of the experience management movement. He wrote an article way back in 1994 that was printed in Marketing Management, which is a publication of the American Marketing Association, called Engineering Customer Experiences. And I would argue that was probably where the term customer experience may have originated from. Lou has written another book called Clued In: How to Keep Customers Coming Back Again and Again. And he's worked with great, legacy companies like Pizza Hut, KFC, Avis, H&R Block, General Motors, IBM, Taco Bell, and a number of others. He's lectured and taught at leading institutions like Harvard Business School, Cornell School of Business, and currently is a professor of practice at the same place where I'm teaching at Michigan State University in the Customer Experience Management Program, and an honor to be a colleague of Lou's. Lou, welcome back to the show.
Mark, thank you so much. And I'm so grateful to be a colleague of yours as we try to really make a difference in the space. And I admire the work that you're doing, the podcast, and I enjoy every moment that we ever chat. It's so exciting to be on the show again and on the podcast. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lou. And I go back to something we're going to get into a little bit of today, which is the definition of customer experience. You and I started off chatting a little bit about that, and you brought up some of the, obfuscation. That's a crazy word that come to my mind, but it's probably fitting for what's going on with the definition of it. But I want to go back to your book, Clued In, because you have a quote there. There's a few quotes from guests of mine that will stand the test of time. And to me, this is one of them. You say here, the fact is customers cannot not have an experience! Exclamation point. They'll have one, whether you want them to or not. The question is, how random or managed is the experience you are delivering? Say more about that.
Oh, gosh, it's so amazing that something that wasn't quite grammatically
right,
being one of the most quoted elements of that book and out of my keynotes. And I was just at a presentation at an orientation of new employees at an organization, a healthcare organization, and up on the screen pops, you cannot not have an experience. It's a question of whether it's managed or haphazard.
Yeah.
No, without attribution, which is fine because I don't really care. I just want to see that awareness that whether you like it or not, you can't declare a moratorium on experience.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. If you're out there and listening to this, that is a pet peeve of mine. I saw one of those yesterday on LinkedIn where somebody just totally echoed what Joe Pine had written decades and decades ago and didn't give any, took it as credit for themselves. Please do. If you're using, it doesn't hurt anything to give attribution. It doesn't take away anything from what you're sharing. Please do. All right. That's my little soapbox.
I think that's a malady in the, I don't know whether it's global, Mark, or whether it's just in customer experience management. You know, what is powerful is I've been fortunate enough to have many people that will recognize the contribution the first article made. Joe Pine read a draft of the article because he was at the IBM Advanced Business Institute where I was an adjunct faculty member, and Steve had him read it, and from that, Joe began to work on, actually originally wanted to write with Steve and I. Steve was busy doing another book. But attribution and understanding where ideas and thoughts stem from, we need to recognize that. And I see it so often where I'll see stuff from Joe, stuff from Colin Shaw, and it's not an attribution of any sort. I think that to a great degree, we don't recognize other people. It's a very interesting situation. And there are people that make a difference in our lives and make a difference in our perspectives, and recognition of that only makes us look bigger. And I love your plea. That is awesome.
Well, Lou, thanks for saying that. And I wanted to kick off by talking about the sigmoid curve, because you mentioned it to me in terms of we're being at a crossroads in the CX profession. And for those who are listening who aren't familiar with CX, or you're just business leaders or people outside of even the mainstream business world, and you're listening to the show today, you're going to get an education. Hopefully you already heard something about what customer experience is from the quote that I shared that Lou wrote back and clued in. But tell us about the sigmoid curve and the proliferation of definitions of CX and what it's done or hasn't done for us.
Yeah, I think that we reached back when I wrote Clued In, which was after the original article. The end of the book quotes one of my favorite poems, which is Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken.
Mm-hmm.
And what Steve and I outlined, and what was outlined and clued in, was the road not taken. How to design to emotion, how to imprint emotion in experiences, how to understand unconscious thought, and a rigorous system for aligning clues in an organization in terms of value creation that was distinctive. And to me, that was the road not taken. And that's the road that I've traveled down, and several others and companies that we've worked with have traveled down. But by and large, people stayed on the road, not the road less traveled by, but stayed on the road that they knew. And what they did is did window dressing on that. Surveys became experience management operating systems. We relabeled things on the old road. Journey mapping was literally taking, and it ended up looking more like process mapping than experience design. And we ended up fixing broken, which we've been trying to do forever, versus creating distinctive economic value. So what happened is the velocity of the importance of customer experience in terms of creating distinctive value in organizations. People latched onto this idea of customer experience management that went beyond customer satisfaction or even what I would call service. But they renamed everything and continued to do what we always did, and it grew with incredible velocity. Billions of hits if you put in customer experience management or experience management on Google. So what is suddenly happening is everyone expected different results from doing what we always did. And suddenly it's under great scrutiny. There's a great amount of debate on whether it's dying. I get really frustrated looking at LinkedIn posts. I try not to, but to stay apprised of where the marketplace is, there's a great deal of frustration.
CX professionals know that every touch point matters. But managing the entire customer journey can be challenging, especially for enterprises due to disjointed data, difficulty aligning stakeholders, and struggling to secure executive support. That's where JourneyTrack comes in. JourneyTrack integrates journey mapping, management, and measurement, allowing you to pinpoint friction, optimize experiences, and demonstrate the ROI of CX initiatives. So you can align teams, break down silos, and then you can track improvements in real time. With JourneyTrack, you get visibility across every channel and touchpoint. No more guesswork, just clear insights and measurable results. Join the CX leaders who transform journeys into improved experiences with impactful business outcomes like reduced churn and increased customer lifetime value. Visit journeytrack.io today and see how better journeys lead to better business.
This message is brought to you by Apple Card. Hey, did you know you can get up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase you make with Apple Card? It's not a complicated point system, just unlimited daily cash back on every purchase. No waiting for rewards and no limits on where you can use your daily cash. Use it on food, shopping, travel. The choice is yours. As an added benefit, you can even choose to let your daily cash grow over time by opening a high-yield savings account through Apple Card. Visit apple.co/card calculator today and discover just how much daily cash you can earn. That's apple.co/card calculator. Subject to credit approval, savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility. Savings in Apple Card by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch, member FDIC. Terms and more at applecard.com.
People looking for jobs disappearing in experience management. So I believe that the sigmoid curve, which is when things begin to plateau and there's no longer rapid growth, is where we are in the movement. And to latch on to what I would call next practices, which deal with emotion, not just talking about the importance of emotion, which so many people do, but the depth of being able to understand emotion, neuroscience, psychology, sociology. And I think that's what's so beautiful about experience management is it's interdisciplinary, it's cross-functional, and it deals with so many different issues. And I think, Mark, that's what's so beautiful about the program that we teach in. But what is hugely difficult is there's such fragmentation in the system and in the industry that there isn't even a common definition that everyone agrees to or embraces. So I'm on a crusade. I'm about to launch a survey that I would love to have people repost that will look at origins of where people came from, whether they came out of a call center, whether they came out of customer sat, whether they came out of research. When I was asked by a wonderful client, a gentleman named Bill Donnelly, who is part of a group of companies that said, what is the definition of customer experience? So they started to do a search, and then Bill engaged me to look at that space. And as we talked, and as I brought forth academics, because I've written probably 16 or 17 academic articles in collaboration with people like Len Berry, Catherine Braun, luminaries in the marketing space, I looked, and there are probably, at the surface level, 16 or 17 different definitions. One of the original definitions, even preceding the definition that Steve and I came up with, but it was more around general, was Bernd Schmidt, who was a professor at Columbia, that talked about experiential marketing and the value of thinking about what an experience is generically. And then Steve and I published a definition that was multisensory, emotional, unconscious thought. And then there are probably a ton of others. So this survey that we'd like to put forth in this research project, and because Michigan State is such a research-driven institution and has the #1 market research master's degree in the country, so I think it's wonderful that we can actually put forth a survey that tries to create, looking at what existing definitions there are. What would you define it as? I'm not going to go through the actual design of the questionnaire.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it would be to synthesize all of that information, understand the distinctions between people's origins coming into the business, and try to consolidate a single definition that can be embraced by the industry. And I think that this fragmentation is so difficult. Six Sigma clearly defined what its role was and a definition of what Six Sigma was. And we have never done that. There are all these conflicting, independent definitions that some are in conflict with others, some are similar. But getting one common definition and then we wonder why even members of our faculty, not our faculty in the program, but faculty in general in marketing, doesn't understand what customer experience is totally. The idea of, I see this all over the place, whether it's academics or whether it's CEOs, the clarity around what customer experience is And I like to think of it as experience management. The reason that we call the company experience engineering, and it wasn't by, we have experiences every day. It's the atomic structure of life. And if we can master understanding human nature, and embed that in the way we look at experience management, we would be much more successful. So I think that this need to move to the next level, what I would call advanced practices and advanced perspectives on experience management, starting with a definition, and really have begin to take the road not taken, the road less traveled, because I think that's where the future really is.
Lou, if you're comfortable sharing and not to steal any thunder, I think people who would respond to the survey will give their own opinion anyway. But what would you suggest as a definition of customer experience or experience management?
Yeah, I think there are several key factors. One is what I would call emotional imprinting, that in addition to the functionality of the good or service, emotional imprinting, that we imprint an emotion that is desired by the recipient of the experience. And that could be my wife, anybody. But if we become much more sensitive to what people desire feeling and then deliver the experience by focusing on those emotions. And those emotions are very base, and then they ladder up. There are basically basic human needs, there are cultural, and then there are individual. And what we talk about is clues that create that emotional connection embedded in the experience.
So let's play that out. Let's talk about, could you share like an example of a real life purchase situation where this happens?
Absolutely. I'm going to use an old example in banking, Mark, that I think you would appreciate.
Yeah.
When we did our original, for some reason, when the original article was published, a lot of the interest was in Canada. I have no idea why. Royal Bank of Canada had wanted to buy the Bank of Montreal or merge with the Bank of Montreal. The government stepped in and stopped it because Royal Bank of Canada was seen as the elite bank. There was a clue in their experience, which was there are flecks of 14-karat gold in the glass in their headquarters. I mean, that's a pretty hefty clue that created this sense of they're better than other buildings and that they're elite, et cetera, et cetera. So when you begin to look at the unconscious psychological aspects, RBC couldn't understand why they weren't liked and why the government and people stepped in. So in our work, I think one of the most incredible things is often companies will talk about having customers valued. They're very, very common. If I looked, there are probably millions of companies that are like, we need to value our customers. There's a huge difference between being valued and feeling significant. Valued unconsciously has an economic impact, or that they think I'm worthwhile from a financial perspective. Significant is a human connection. So when we used to do a ton of observational video, and back then, Mark, every hour of observational video required an hour of clue scanning it, looking at clues and signals. So what we realized, observing the departure, they had developed a customer service departure after someone came in for a mortgage application. They wanted to increase that experience. So they developed 5 things. One was walk them to the door. The other was thank them for their business. And I forget the other 3. I think one was don't trip them on the way out. I mean, I don't remember exactly
Right.
what they were. But what we observed was facial expression as the meeting would wrap up. Here you are, you've just poured out all this personal information. Back then, there was a lot of paper, and you've filled out a mortgage application. It's got all of this personal information, and we would watch it go onto a stack of paper before they walked the person to the door. And you'd watch the person, watch it go on top of a stack that was, in some cases, a few inches, but in one case in particular, I don't know how backlogged the individual was, but it was way on top. And what we began to realize in unconscious thought, as we did interviews using a specific technique to get at unconscious framing, people didn't feel that they were significant. They got put into this pile of other work. So we created a clue called a grasp, which is when you walk them to the door, you hold that piece of paper in your hand as though that's your next action item versus I'm putting this off. And unconsciously, the emotional metrics around feeling more significant increase significantly.
Yeah.
So it's the subtleties in an experience. And what many organizations overlook are what we call the clues, the subtleties, the unconscious clues that are processed in an experience that build that emotional imprinting.
Lou, you talked about how companies often think about how we want to be perceived as a brand by the customer. And before we got on today, you talked about maybe that's not exactly how we should be thinking about it.
Yes, it's a natural tendency to want to know how people feel about you. I mean, we do this every day, every way, because it's our low self-esteem. I think everyone has some degree, except perhaps I shouldn't get political. But many people need that reinforcement. Well, companies are not any different, and that's why NPS and scores like that become important. I don't think that scores and surveys will ever go away. I think that they're great for performance metrics. They are not great for insight in terms of distinctive value creation. What happens is we're so focused on the attributes of the organization and what the organization represents and the emotions that people attribute to how the organization portrays its emotions. We need to flip that because ultimately it's how we cause our customers, our employees, our spouses, how they feel about themselves, which in turn is how they feel about us.
Yeah.
So it's basic unconscious human nature, and it seems somewhat counterintuitive, but that's what leads to how they feel about the organization ultimately. Unconsciously, where they process that, that's the link that emotionally bonds them to experiences and creates what Jag Seth and other authors that wrote a great book called Firms of Endearment talk about organizations that if they went away tomorrow, we would mourn the loss of them. It would change our lives. It's because how they make us feel about ourselves ultimately.
Lou, can you think of a good example of either an experience or a company that does that well?
Yes, and I think that what's interesting is Simon Sinek touches on it, but I don't people can't grasp that. And that's why we talk about an experience motif, which is what are the emotions that resonate and how do you design the experience to imprint those emotions? I just sat through an introduction where a company was talking about its why with a group of employees. And what they thought their why was what they do. I'm sorry, how they do it.
Gotcha.
And it was a healthcare organization. And I challenged that thought, saying that's not the why. The why is making a difference in other people's lives. So this idea of getting to that emotional resonance. And what we've done is actually develop tools that unconsciously can look at what we call emotional congruency. Once you've determined what those emotions are we achieving that on an unconscious level? And are people feeling the emotions that we have targeted that they desire feeling?
So, Lou, what would you say to the person listening now who's been under a lot of pressure as CX leader, for example, to prove the ROI of CX? And how do you connect those dots from experience design and designing an experience that makes customers feel good about themselves and contributing to the financial health of the organization?
Exactly. I can point to situations where one client, and what we did is actually ran a program alongside it that netted $14 million in savings in the delivery of appliances. That's an ROI. What ended up happening was greater loyalty with the customers and more feedback and positive feedback that they couldn't believe it. And what it was actually creating corner protectors, runners that would go in, that you would go over hardwood floors and other things with, that actually cut down on damage. So when you really design an experience customer back versus company out, and understand what they're feeling because you're damaging their property, it becomes huge in terms of return on investment. And I think that there are two aspects to the powers of experience management. One is return on investment, and the other is return on strategy.
Say more about that.
The two go hand in hand.
Well, say more about that.
Yeah, that an organization will develop a strategy. And I believe that we actually created a certification program in corporate strategy because people that were in management would leave a meeting where strategy was developed and then go back and not be able to understand what the strategy was, and they're supposed to execute it. So this whole idea of is a result of a corporate strategy. And if I can help you accelerate the momentum and the velocity and the impact of the strategy, it would have an impact on ROI. And the difficulty sometimes with ROI is there are other factors that enter in that are disconnected within an organization. Price increases. Lately, I hate to bring up, I might get sued for this one, but someone like, I'm not going to name the product, but it's a smaller candy bar. And there are these changes that are taking place that are subtle, especially today in what organizations are facing, and we'll probably see even more of this with tariffs, that begin to impact my loyalty and what they're going to get on the investments that are made. So when you begin to align those investments strategically toward a financial goal and monitor those, it's incredible. And that comes down to living the values of the organization. I've done a lot. My heart belongs to Mayo Clinic. I'm both a patient there, I've done lectures there, done all sorts of stuff over the years for 27 years. And values become so critical because values can actually impact bottom line. I think the greatest example is a client of ours, which was La Quinta Hotels. Michael Powell, Colin Powell's son, who was the chair at Mayo Clinic, said, when you live the values of the organization, you become a virtuous organization. And when you become a virtuous organization, you're no longer thought of as a corporate entity. So when we think about Mayo Clinic or even Disney back in the day, I think Disney is quite different today than when I was working with them. But back in the day, Disney would announce the opening of the Grand Floridian Hotel, and Regis and Kathy would be there, press from all over the world. This was a corporation promoting a new hotel and have press from all over the world because it was considered virtuous. So when you cross that bridge to virtue, so the example with La Quinta that I thought was so beautiful is, number one, the COO, CEO, and the management team there, when they articulated their values with work that we did with them, because that leads to aligning values with customers' desired emotions. So one of the great things was they felt that you can't do posters. So the senior management said, posters are ridiculous, little cards are ridiculous. We need to be reminded every day, but with movement, because values are living. So they developed a series of TV screens that were throughout headquarters and throughout the system in various places, where they used a still photo. So, for example, one of the ones was around sanitation and really intent cleaning of the room with a sanitary mindset. And this was before COVID. So they had developed a whole system for doing that. And one of these values was portrayed by a housekeeper. And that was still, but what was moving in the background were the curtains. So you couldn't walk by it without seeing some motion. And I think that that's what we overlook in experience management, is the importance of this is a way of doing business, and it's not a reporting system. It's not a process improvement business. Originally, I think I took the first title of Chief Experience Officer globally. When we started, I think I was a Chief Experience Officer in Carbone and Company that preceded Experience Engineering, because that's what I was doing at that time. And I think we lost sight that the Chief Experience Officer in a company is the CEO, responsible for fiduciary growth and value creation, but also responsible for the value creation within the organization for employees and customers. And what happened is we promoted MBAs that are and that was financial management. And then we wonder why we have difficulty penetrating, understanding the integrity and the power of experience management and contributing to the bottom line.
Well said. So many great thoughts, from the sigmoid curve to the definition of experience management, and look out for a potential survey that Lou's going to initiate to help us get some commonality around the definition, and also thinking about how customers, not so much how they feel about your brand, but how they feel about themselves after experiencing your brand, right? And Lou, let me kind of close this out by asking you, what delights you, since it's the Delighted Customers podcast, what delights you as a customer?
What delights me as a customer is I'll take Apple as an example that if it went away tomorrow, I would mourn the loss of. But I feel emotionally synchronized with Apple in terms of one of the curses I'm blessed with, if there's such a thing, is thinking differently. And I really align with what Apple represented in the past. I'm also an early adopter, which is not a good thing. But what delights me is feeling supported in my desire to advance things. And if I'm buying Apple products, I feel I'm advancing my ability to advance other things, because to me it represents the most advanced set of principles that I can live with. I remember when iPod came out, or even the iPad, told my wife it was the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I have a computer, I have a phone. I go to Best Buy and I pick one up and I create an intellectual alibi, which consumers do based on emotion. And I said, oh, I've got $85 in rewards. I think I'll buy this. This is phenomenal. It was the feel, and it was the fact that it was distinctive and different, which I had poo-pooed from a distance.
Yeah, going back to Simon Sinek that you brought up, he talks about how Apple challenges the status quo.
Yes. And I think that's been my life, unfortunately, in some ways.
Well, you're a visionary and you helped us make breakthroughs in the CX profession. Lou, thank you so much for being a guest again on the show.
Mark, thank you so much for having me. I love you and the work that you do, the way that you think, and the contribution you're making to this space I'm speechless. It's what we need.
Thank you so much, Lou. It means a lot, especially coming from you.
Thank you, Mark.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Delighted Customers podcast. It would mean so much if you would take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts, click on the plus sign or follow button, and that will ensure that you don't miss an episode, and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave a 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday.